She was barefoot, her small feet covered in red dust, walking along the airport fence with nothing but a bag of tools her father once gave her. The sun in Ouagadougou burned her skin, but she didn't complain. Her name was Amira, just 17, and from a small forgotten village where people barely had food. But somehow she carried something no one expected: the skill to fix things others gave up on. On that day, a massive aircraft stood still on the runway. Not just any aircraft, it was the private military jet of President Ibrahim Traoré himself. The engine had failed mid-taxi, hours before he was supposed to fly to a global peace summit in Ghana. Engineers from France, Morocco, and even Russia were flown in. Dozens of specialists stood in confusion around the engine, scratching their heads. The entire presidential team waited in silence. Every second lost was a blow to Burkina Faso's image, and to the man many now saw as a rising lion of Africa. But amidst the chaos, no one noticed the girl standing behind the barrier, quietly watching, understanding. Amira had grown up beside a scrapyard, where broken parts from old trucks and abandoned army tanks were dumped. Her father, once a small-time mechanic, taught her how to read engines like stories. After he passed away, she kept fixing, kept learning, with no books, no formal school, only instinct and observation. Her dream? To one day fix a real jet engine, not for fame, but just to prove to herself she could. And that dream? It stood right in front of her. Security wouldn't let her through. No entry, they said. But Amira didn't argue. She simply walked away, only to return minutes later with a folded paper in her hand. It was a rough sketch she made of the jet's engine based on what she'd seen, with a note that said, "Check valve 17B. There's pressure loss." She slid the paper through the gate and walked off. Just like that. At first the guards laughed, but somehow the paper reached a senior engineer who was desperate enough to check. And when he did, silence. Then shouting, then scrambling. They found it, the valve. Faulty. Hidden deep, missed by everyone. "Who gave this?" the engineer asked. "She was just a girl," someone said. "Gone now." The airport buzzed. The president's staff panicked. "Find her," they said. "Bring her back now." Hours passed. The plane was fixed, but Traoré refused to board. "Not until I meet the girl who saved this mission," he said quietly. "Not until I thank her." Some said it was a waste of time. Others said it was too late. But Traoré didn't move. His guards were sent out across the nearby towns showing her sketch, asking for a girl with dirt-stained hands and a bag of tools. Meanwhile, Amira sat in a quiet corner behind a fuel station, unaware of the storm she'd just triggered. She wasn't used to attention. In her mind, she had done what needed to be done, nothing more. But far away, her name had already reached the ears of men in suits, generals in command, and one president who never forgot where he came from. When the guards finally found her, Amira thought she was in trouble. They didn't speak. They simply opened the back of the SUV, and she sat between two tall men in black. No handcuffs. Just silence. And then she saw him. Ibrahim Traoré stood, waiting beside the fixed jet, the sun reflecting off his sunglasses. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He just looked thoughtful. As Amira stepped out of the car, everyone stopped. Even the birds in the sky seemed to pause. She looked up, nervous. He walked to her slowly. "Was it you?" he asked. She nodded. Traoré didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a small golden medal. Not for war, not for politics, but for honor. He leaned down, pinned it gently to her faded shirt, and whispered, "Africa sees you now." The crowd around gasped. Cameras flashed. One of the foreign engineers dropped his headset. The image of a poor girl dressed in second-hand clothes, standing beside the most powerful man in Burkina Faso, was now forever etched in history. But this was only the beginning. Because when President Traoré turned to board his plane, he stopped halfway, looked back, and said the words that left the world speechless. But we'll get to that in the next part. She's coming with me. That's what President Ibrahim Traoré said, and just like that, the entire airport went silent again. The reporters looked around, unsure if they'd heard him right. His ministers exchanged quiet glances. Amira stood frozen. She wasn't sure what he meant. She didn't ask. But when the guard stepped aside and gestured toward the stairs of the jet, she knew. She was no longer just a village girl with grease on her hands. For that moment, she was the only one invited aboard the most important plane in Africa. Inside, the jet was nothing like the world Amira came from. Polished floors, blinking control panels, soft seats, and the quiet hum of power. Still, she sat quietly in the corner, holding her father's old wrench in her lap like it was gold. Traoré, calm as ever, walked over and asked her just one question. Where did you learn to see what no engineer could? She looked up, surprised. From my Baba, she said softly. He fixed things no one else could. The president didn't speak for a moment. Then he nodded. We could use more people like you, people who look beyond the surface. What no one knew was that this wasn't just a simple trip to Ghana. The summit was more than politics. Traoré was set to present a proposal to unite a group of West African nations under a single economic pact, an agreement that could change Africa's future. Billions were at stake, and not everyone wanted it to happen. Hours before the flight, there had been whispers about sabotage, about foreign pressure, about forces trying to delay the summit just long enough for things to fall apart. And when the jet engine failed, some started to suspect it wasn't an accident. That's why Traoré stayed calm. That's why he insisted on meeting the girl who saved the mission. He had seen too much in his short time in power to believe in coincidences. As the jet flew smoothly through the clouds, Amira sat watching the world below, unaware that her name was already being spoken in diplomatic rooms and across newsrooms. She had no phone, no online presence, yet she had just saved a meeting that could shape the future of a continent. Back at the airport, one of the foreign engineers who had mocked her sketch earlier was now reviewing her drawing over and over again. How did she know about this valve? He kept asking. It's not even in the standard manual. His colleague shrugged. Maybe we missed something, he muttered, but deep down, he knew. She saw what they couldn't. In the air, Traoré received a call from his national security advisor. The voice on the line was tense. Mr. President, we've intercepted a signal. There's a group trying to block your arrival. They say it's too dangerous to land in Accra tonight. Why? Traoré asked calmly. They think the Unity Pact threatens too many interests. They want it stopped. The president turned and looked at Amira, still staring out the window like a curious child. He lowered his voice and said, "Tell them we're landing anyway." But the moment the jet touched down in Ghana, things started to shift. Protesters had gathered outside the summit venue. International news crews swarmed the area, trying to catch any slip, any sign of failure. Some leaders hesitated to attend. Others waited to see if Traoré would even show. But then, a convoy pulled up. And out stepped the president and the girl. Dressed in a borrowed jacket, Amira walked beside him, unaware that cameras had already caught her face and zoomed in on the medal pinned to her chest. Reporters screamed questions. Who is she? Why did you bring her? Is she part of your team? Traoré paused at the steps of the summit hall, looked into the sea of flashing lights and simply said, "She fixed what your best engineers couldn't." Maybe it's time we look for brilliance in places we've ignored. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Leaders argued. Some doubted the plan, others questioned its timing. The room buzzed with hesitation until Traoré stepped up to the podium. Amira sat quietly in the audience, unnoticed now, but watching every move. He didn't read from paper. He didn't shout. Instead, he told a story. A girl, he began, from the forgotten parts of our land, solved a problem that specialists from the world's richest nations couldn't, not because she was lucky, but because she was prepared. She was ready when the world least expected it. He paused, looked at the leaders seated before him. How many such people are we overlooking? How much potential have we buried under poverty? If we don't build a continent that gives people like her a platform, then what are we even trying to unite for? Silence followed. And then, the first clap came from a woman at the back, then another, and slowly, the entire hall was on its feet. But just as Traoré stepped down, his chief of security rushed toward him, whispering urgently. "They're here," he said. "The ones who tried to stop the plane. And they're not done yet." Traoré didn't flinch. He turned to look at Amira, who had just stood up from her seat, confusion in her eyes. In that moment, something passed between them. A silent understanding. And then everything changed. But what happened next would not only shake the summit, it would shake the entire world. Amira had no idea what was happening, but the sudden shift in the president's expression told her something was wrong. The security team quickly surrounded Traoré, their earpieces buzzing with updates. People in the room started whispering, confused by the sudden tension. The clapping stopped. Outside the summit building, black SUVs rolled up without flags and the atmosphere grew heavy. Inside, Traoré remained calm. He leaned toward Amira and said softly, "Stay close." Within minutes, 3 men in expensive suits entered the hall. They weren't part of the summit. They represented foreign interests, quiet powers who preferred influence behind the scenes. One of them stepped forward and, without even acknowledging Amira, looked directly at Traoré. "Mr. President," he said, "delaying this pact would be in everyone's best interest. There's too much at stake. Rushing could lead to instability." Wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Everyone held their breath. Even the leaders who had doubts about the pact now waited to see what Traoré would say. He glanced at the man, then at the entire room, and finally at Amira. "This morning," he said, "my plane was grounded. Not because of mechanical failure, but because of fear. Fear that Africa might finally begin to rise on its own terms. And yet the solution came not from wealth or influence, but from a girl with no formal education, no privilege, just pure will and wisdom." The room was silent. Traoré continued, "If we let fear decide our future, then we are no different from those who once dictated it for us. I will not delay. We sign today." The man in the suit didn't respond. He simply turned and walked out. What followed in the next hour was something no one could have predicted. One by one, the leaders of West African nations came forward. Papers were signed, hands were shaken, a new pact was born, uniting economies, technology, and resources to strengthen the region. But in the center of it all, standing quietly with her eyes wide open, was Amira. Her name was now known across the continent. News headlines read, "Poor African girl fixes president's plane, changes history." Interviews were requested, offers poured in, scholarships, endorsements, and even invitations from international universities. But Amira wasn't interested in attention. She only asked for one thing. "I want to open a workshop in my village," she said, "where girls like me can learn to fix things too." Traoré smiled at that. "You'll have more than a workshop. You'll have a school." Weeks later, Amira stood in front of a small building, painted fresh in green and gold, with a sign that read, "The Amira Technical Center, for girls with big hands and bigger dreams." Children lined up at the gate, tools in hand, curiosity in their eyes. And though Amira still wore her father's old jacket, she now carried something even more powerful: hope. Back in the capital, President Ibrahim Traoré reflected on what had happened. The threats, the pressure, the almost sabotage, all had been overcome by a single act of brilliance from someone no one expected. In meetings with global leaders, he often pointed to Amira's story as proof of what Africa holds when it trusts its people. And for the world watching, it was a reminder that true power doesn't always wear suits. Sometimes it walks barefoot, carrying a wrench and a dream. Because in the end, it wasn't just about fixing a plane. It was about fixing the way we see each other.